The bench was wet from the morning rain when I found him. My son was sitting there with his knees pulled up like he used to do when he was 8 years old, and the world had been unfair to him at school. Beside him, my granddaughter was asleep against his shoulder, her little pink backpack slumped on the ground, and there were 3 trash bags lined up by his feet like soldiers waiting for orders. He looked up at me and his face did something I had not seen since his father died. He tried to smile and could not finish it. "Mom," he said, "she locked the door. I don't have anywhere to take her." I set my purse down on the bench. I looked at the trash bags. I looked at my granddaughter's tangled hair and the way her shoe was untied and the way my boy's hand was shaking around his coffee cup, and I felt something in me settle the way it settles before I walk into a courtroom. I have been a real estate attorney in this state for 34 years. I know what panic looks like. Panic is a luxury you pay for later, and I was not going to let my son pay that bill. I smiled at him. I do not know if it came out as warm as I meant it. I said, "Get your daughter, we're going home." He blinked at me. "Mom, I don't have a home." "That's what I'm telling you." I picked up 2 of the trash bags myself. I am 68 years old and they were heavier than I expected, but I was not going to let him see me struggle. I said, "Sweetheart, you have me. You have always had me. Now pick up that baby and follow me to the car." That is how it started, or rather, that is how I came in at the middle of it. The beginning had been happening for almost 2 years, and I had been watching it from the outside, the way a person watches a slow car accident through a window and cannot get the door open in time. My son's name is something I will not say here, but he was my late one, my surprise baby, born when I was 31 and already convinced I was done. His sister was almost in high school by the time he came along. He grew up sweet. He grew up the kind of boy who would cry at dog food commercials and bring me dandelions from the yard like they were diamonds. He married a woman named Whitney when he was 29. She seemed fine. I want to be honest about that. She seemed fine. Not warm, not the kind of girl who hugged you twice, but she was polite and she made him laugh. And I have been around long enough to know that you do not get to pick your son's wife. You get to love whoever he loves, and you keep your mouth shut about the rest. What I did not see fast enough was her mother. Whitney's mother was a woman named Roberta. I called her Bobby to her face because she asked me to, and I called her Roberta in my head because I never trusted her. She was 3 years older than me, twice divorced, and she had moved in with Whitney and my son 4 months after the wedding because she had nowhere else to go. That was what Whitney told us. Mom is between places. Mom needs a soft landing. Mom is going through a hard time. Roberta showed up with 2 suitcases and stayed for 9 years. When my husband was alive, he would tell me to leave it alone. He would say, "That is their marriage, not ours." He died of a heart attack on a Sunday morning in our kitchen when he was 64 years old, and he did not get to see what happened next. And sometimes when I am alone, I am almost grateful for that. About 4 years after he passed, my son and Whitney bought a house. They bought it on Pinecrest Avenue in a neighborhood called Millbrook, which is the kind of suburb where the trees are older than the houses and the sidewalks have a slight crack where the roots come up. It was a beautiful little place. 3 bedrooms, a front porch, a Japanese maple in the yard that turned the color of fire in October. Here's the thing about that house. They could not have bought it without me. I want to say that calmly, because for a long time I did not say it at all. My son and Whitney did not have the down payment. They had about $11,000 saved between them, and they needed almost 10 times that. I sat down at my dining room table the spring after my husband died, and I wrote out a check for $41,000, and I slid it across the table to my son. I told him this was not a loan. I told him it was a gift, free and clear, and that I wanted him and Whitney and their future children to have a place that was theirs. But because I have done what I do for a living for as long as I have done it, I did one more thing. I had my son and Whitney sign a 1-page document. It was not complicated. It said that the $41,000 was being gifted for the express purpose of contributing to the down payment on a primary residence, and that in the event of dissolution of the marriage, the gift would be considered separate property attributable to my son. Whitney signed it without reading it, because Whitney never read anything she did not have to. My son signed it because he trusted me. I notarized it myself, witnessed by my paralegal at the time, and I put a copy in my safe and gave them a copy and sent a third copy to my attorney to hold. A year later, my granddaughter was born. They named her something her grandfather would have loved, and I held her in the hospital and cried, the way you cry when you realize life is going to keep going whether you are ready or not. Roberta moved in with them 6 months after the baby came. She said it was to help with childcare. She said it was temporary. She said a lot of things. What she actually did was take over. I watched it happen one Thanksgiving at a time. The first year, Roberta cooked. The second year, Roberta decided what time we ate. The third year, Roberta sat at the head of the table where my husband used to sit when they came to my house. And when I came to theirs, she sat at the head, and my son sat to her right, and Whitney sat to her left, and I sat down at the foot like a guest at a stranger's dinner. The fourth year, I was told that Christmas would now be hosted at their house permanently because, quote, the baby needed stability, and Roberta did not enjoy traveling. I did not enjoy being uninvited from hosting my own family, but I smiled and I brought a pie. I want to skip ahead because the slow parts are not the parts you came for. Last spring, my son called me on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember it was a Tuesday because I had just gotten home from a closing in a town 2 hours away and my feet were swollen and I was making myself a cup of tea. He said, "Mom, Whitney and I are separating." He said it in the flat voice he uses when he is trying not to cry. He said, "She has been seeing someone for about a year. I have known for maybe 6 months. We are going to try to do this the easy way." I asked him what the easy way looked like. He said, "She will move out. I will keep the house. We will share custody of our daughter. Her mother is going to help her find an apartment." I want to tell you that I believed him. I want to tell you I thought it was going to be that simple. But I have watched too many couples come into my office over the years and tell me about the easy way, and the easy way almost never happens. The easy way requires 2 people who still respect each other and a third party who has nothing to gain. There was no third party with nothing to gain. There was no third party with nothing to gain. There was Roberta. For 3 weeks, things were quiet. My son slept in the guest room. Whitney slept in the master bedroom. The little one bounced between them like she had always done. Roberta stayed put, sleeping in the basement suite they had built for her, eating their food, watching their television, telling everyone she was just there to help. My son told me on a Sunday that Whitney had started looking at apartments. He told me she had given notice at her job because she was going to move to Asheville to be closer to the man she had been seeing. He told me Roberta was going with her, which was a piece of news I privately found delicious. Then the calls started coming. The first call came from Whitney. She said the house had been purchased during the marriage, and so it was a marital asset, and she was entitled to half. She said she had spoken to an attorney. She said her attorney had said the down payment from me was a gift to both of them, not just to her husband, and that it was going to be split. I let my son handle that one because it was technically his marriage. He told her about the document. He told her she had signed it. She said she did not remember signing anything and that he was lying. The second call came from Roberta. Roberta called me directly. I had not spoken to her on the phone in maybe 4 years. She said, "Listen, we need to be reasonable here." She said, "My daughter has been a wife and a mother in that house for almost a decade, and you cannot expect her to walk away with nothing." She said, "That paper you had them sign, that thing, no court is going to honor that." She said, "You are going to look very small if you try to use it." I let her talk. I let her say everything she wanted to say. When she was finished, I said, "Bobby, I am not the one you need to be talking to. But since you brought it up, I will tell you one thing for your own benefit. The document is enforceable. It was drafted properly. It was executed properly. It was notarized. And the funds are traceable through bank records to the exact down payment on the exact property. So if your daughter intends to pursue that, she will not win, and she will spend more in legal fees than she would have walked away with." Roberta was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "We will see about that." I should have known then. I should have heard what was underneath those 4 words. But I am 68 years old, and I have spent my whole career assuming that people, on average, will be reasonable when they understand they are about to lose. That was the mistake I made. I assumed Roberta would do the math. She did not do the math. What she did, 2 weeks later, was wait until my son left for work on a Thursday morning. He was driving the baby to daycare. He was not even gone for an hour. While he was out, Roberta and Whitney called a locksmith. They had every lock on the house replaced. The front door, the back door, the side door from the garage. They threw 3 trash bags of his clothes onto the porch. They put his shaving kit in one, his running shoes in another. The framed photograph of this father from the dresser, the one with the wooden frame I had given him for his college graduation, they tossed in on top of the running shoes. When my son came back from daycare, his key did not work. He stood on the porch ringing his own doorbell for 40 minutes. Through the front window, he could see Whitney sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee, not looking at him. Roberta opened the door once, just a crack, and told him that he was no longer welcome on the premises, and that if he did not leave, she would call the police and tell them he was being threatening. Then she closed the door in his face. He sat on the porch for another half hour before he picked up the trash bags and walked them to his car. He drove to the daycare. He sat in the parking lot. He called his sister who lives in Phoenix and she did not pick up. He called me. I did not get the call because I was in a hearing. By the time I checked my phone, it was almost noon, and there were 6 missed calls from him and a voicemail that was just him breathing. I called him back. He answered on the first ring. I could hear my granddaughter in the background asking him why he was crying. He told me where he was. I told him I would be there in 20 minutes. I drove faster than I should have. I parked across the street from the little playground next to the daycare, and I walked over to that wet bench, and I saw my boy with 3 trash bags and a 4-year-old. And the thing in me that settles before court, it settled. I drove them to my house. The drive took 45 minutes. My granddaughter fell asleep again in the back seat. My son did not speak the whole way. I put on the radio so the silence would not be the only thing in the car. When we got home, I made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup because that was what I made him when he was small and his world was wrong. He ate 2 sandwiches. He apologized for crying. I told him crying was the most reasonable response to what had just happened and that I would not tolerate him apologizing for being a human being. My granddaughter watched cartoons in the den. I made her a bed on the pull-out couch with the quilt my mother had made. Then I called my friend Ginger. Ginger is an attorney too, but she does family law, which I do not, and we have been having lunch together every other Tuesday for 26 years. I told her what had happened. She was quiet for about 10 seconds, and then she said, "Honey, what your son's wife and her mother just did is called an illegal lockout. In this state, you cannot remove a spouse from the marital residence without a court order, no matter whose name is on the deed, no matter who paid for what. She is going to be in front of a judge by Monday." I asked her if she could take the case. She said yes. I made one more phone call that night. I called a private investigator I have worked with for years. His name is not important, but he is good at what he does, and he is discreet. I asked him to do me a favor that was not strictly legal, but that was not strictly illegal either. I asked him to drive past my son's house in the morning and see what was happening. I asked him to take pictures with timestamps of anyone entering or leaving the property. I asked him to do this for 3 days. He did, and what he documented was very interesting. On the morning after the lockout, Roberta was photographed leaving the house at 9:30 in the morning, getting into a moving truck, and directing 2 men in matching shirts to load furniture out of the garage. Specifically, she was photographed loading the antique secretary desk that had belonged to my mother-in-law and that my son had inherited when his father died. She was also photographed loading a flat-screen television and what appeared to be the contents of my son's home office. On the second morning, Whitney was photographed leaving the house at 11 a.m., carrying a large cardboard box. The box was labeled, in marker, in my son's handwriting, with the word TAXs. On the third morning, both women loaded my granddaughter's toys into the same moving truck. You should know something about me before I tell you the next part. I do not enjoy revenge. I want to be very clear about that. I am not somebody who lies awake at night thinking about how to ruin somebody. I have been a lawyer for too long to confuse vengeance with justice. They are not the same thing. Vengeance is what you want. Justice is what you can prove. Most people who think they want revenge actually want to be heard, and they want the person who hurt them to be held accountable in a way that is visible and undeniable. That is justice. And that is what I do for a living. On Monday morning at 9 a.m., Ginger filed an emergency motion in family court on my son's behalf. The motion requested an emergency restoration of access to the marital residence, an emergency custody arrangement that allowed my son full custody of his daughter, pending further hearing, and a temporary restraining order against both Whitney and Roberta with respect to the marital property. By Monday afternoon, a judge had granted all three. By Tuesday morning, a sheriff's deputy was standing on the porch of the house on Pinecrest Avenue ringing the doorbell. Roberta answered. The deputy handed her a stack of papers. Whitney came to the door behind her. The deputy explained calmly and slowly that as of that moment, my son had been restored full access to the residence, that the locks would need to be changed back at their expense within 48 hours, that my son had legal custody of his daughter pending a further hearing, and that any items that had been removed from the residence in the past 5 days were to be returned immediately. He also told them that an officer would be on the property the following morning to supervise the return of removed property and that failing to comply would result in additional charges. I was not there. Ginger was there. She told me later that Roberta tried to argue with the deputy and that the deputy looked at her like she was something he had stepped in. She told me that Whitney started crying and that Roberta turned to her daughter and said in front of the deputy and in front of Ginger, "I told you we should have done this differently." The case did not go to trial. It almost never does. About 6 weeks later, Whitney and her attorney accepted a settlement. My son kept the house. The $41,000 gift was acknowledged in the final agreement as his separate property. Whitney received half of the increase in value of the home over the course of the marriage, which came out to a manageable number that my son was able to refinance and pay her in a single lump sum. He received primary physical custody of my granddaughter, with Whitney granted visitation every other weekend and one evening a week. Roberta was not granted any rights whatsoever, which surprised her because she had at some point convinced herself that she was a grandparent with a legal claim, which she was not. The antique secretary desk came back. 3 of the drawers were empty when it arrived, and a small porcelain dish that had belonged to my mother-in-law was never accounted for. I let that go. You have to know what to let go. There is one more thing I want to tell you, because the comments on the last story I shared, my friend Ginger says, were asking about this. People kept asking why nobody was charged with a crime. Why didn't I press charges against Roberta? Why didn't my son press charges against Whitney? Wasn't what they did illegal? The honest answer is yes, it was. Changing the locks on a spouse without a court order is, in most states, an illegal eviction. Removing items from a marital residence and disposing of them or hiding them is, in most states, considered marital fraud or even theft, depending on the value. We could have pressed charges. We chose not to. And the reason we chose not to is something I want you to think about. When you're inside something like this, when you're the one whose son just spent 2 hours on a wet bench with his child, you have 2 paths in front of you. You can take the path of maximum punishment. You go for charges. You try to get her arrested. You try to make sure her name is in the local paper. You try to ruin her, and maybe you succeed. Maybe she goes to jail for 90 days. Maybe she pays a fine. Maybe her face is in the police blotter. Or you can take the path of finished business. You get your son's home back. You get his child back. You get his money back. You make sure the person who did this can never do it again. You let her sit with what she did, knowing that her own daughter watched her do it. Knowing that her granddaughter is being raised in the house she tried to steal, knowing that every Christmas card she does not receive is one she earned. I chose finished business. I have not regretted it. Roberta moved with Whitney to Asheville. The man Whitney was seeing did not turn out to be the catch she thought he was. And I hear from people who hear from people that the apartment they are sharing is small and that they are not speaking the way they used to. My son lives on Pinecrest with my granddaughter. He has the locks. He has the deed. He has his daughter. He has a job he likes and a girlfriend now, someone gentle who works at the library and who brought me a tomato plant the first time she came to my house, which I thought was a small, kind thing to do. My granddaughter calls me Grammy, and she is 6 now, and she's going to be tall like her grandfather was. I want to tell you, if you are watching this and you are afraid, the thing I wish somebody had said to me the first time I was afraid, they do not have to panic. Panic is the thing they are counting on. They are counting on you to lose your footing. They are counting on you to act without thinking. They are counting on you to not know what your rights are. The most powerful thing a woman can do, especially a woman my age, especially a mother, is to slow down and ask one question. What do I actually have? Not what do I feel? Not what I feel. Not what am I afraid of? What do I have? Documents, records, witnesses, bank statements, photographs, names of people who will tell the truth. You almost always have more than you think you have. And if you do not, you can start getting it today, tonight, right now. I do not tell my granddaughter this story yet. She is too young, but I am going to tell her one day when she is old enough to understand it. Not because I want her to think badly of her mother. I do not, actually. Whitney made a choice in a hard moment, and the choice was wrong, and she has lived with the wrong of it. I want my granddaughter to know that there were people on her side. I want her to know that when her father had nowhere to go, he had somewhere to go. I want her to know that a mother is forever, even when your child is 40. If you are a son who has nowhere to go tonight, you have somewhere. Call your mother. If your mother is gone, call the woman in your life who has been a mother to you. Call your aunt. Call your old neighbor who used to bring you cookies. Tell her what happened. Tell her the truth. Do not try to protect anybody by making yourself smaller. The smaller you make yourself, the more they take. And if you are a mother and you have a grown child who is hurting, I am going to tell you something I learned. Your job is not finished. It is not. I do not care how old he is. I do not care how old he is. I do not care how independent she is. The job of being a mother is the longest job there is, and there is no retirement plan. When your kid calls you crying, you go. You do not ask questions. You do not lecture. You do not bring up the warnings you gave 4 years ago that nobody listened to. You go. You bring soup. You bring a lawyer if you have one. You bring a bed if you have a spare one. You bring whatever you have. That is what I did. That is what my mother would have done for me. That is what your mother probably did for you, even if you did not see it at the time. Thank you for listening to me tell this. If you have your own story, leave it down below. If there is something you want me to talk about next, the legal pieces of how to protect yourself when a marriage starts to come apart, or the first phone calls you should make when somebody tries to lock you out, or how to find an attorney when you do not know where to start, tell me in the comments. I read them. Everyone, you are not alone in this, and you are not the first one this has happened to, and you do not have to fight by yourself. Take care of yourselves, and take care of your sons, even when they are grown men, especially then. I have thought a lot about that wet bench since the day I sat down next to my son on it. I have thought about Roberta in her small apartment in Asheville, and I have thought about Whitney too, and I have thought about the choices that brought each of us to where we ended up. And what I keep coming back to is something my own mother used to say when I was a girl, which is that every door you close has a hinge on the other side, and the hinge does not care which way you swing it. Roberta thought she was being clever the morning she called that locksmith. She thought she was being a good mother to Whitney. She thought she was protecting her daughter's interests. But what she was actually doing was teaching her daughter that the way you solve a hard problem is by being cruel, and that the way you treat a man you used to call son is like he is nothing. Whitney watched her mother do that, and Whitney is going to remember one day when she is older and her own daughter is grown that her mother showed her how to lock somebody out. That is a debt that compounds. The thing about my son's story, the part I want you to take with you, is that he did not win because he was lucky. He won because, years before any of this happened, somebody sat him down at a dining room table and made him sign a piece of paper. That paper was not cruelty. That paper was love with a paper trail. There is a difference between protecting your child and being suspicious of their spouse, and the difference is whether you do it with a smile and a notary or with a whisper and a grudge. I want you to think about the 3 things that saved my boy. The first was character. He did not lie. He did not retaliate. He did not break a window or scream on a porch. He sat on a bench and called his mother. That is a man with a spine, made of the right material. The second was knowledge. I knew the law because I spent 40 years learning it. You do not have to be an attorney to know what your rights are, but you have to be willing to find out before you need them. The third was strength of will. He let me help him. A lot of grown men cannot do that. Pride keeps them on the bench longer than the rain does. If you are watching this and you have a son or a daughter or a grandchild who you love, do the boring thing today. Write down what you have given them. Notarize what you have promised them. Tell the truth on paper. You are not being cold. You are being kind in a language that holds up in court. And when somebody tries to take what is theirs, you will not be panicking. You will be reaching for a folder. That is the difference between losing everything and losing nothing at all.